There's something about holding a gold coin that stops you cold. Not because of what it's worth today, though it's worth quite a lot, but because of what it was. Because someone carried this. Someone spent it. Someone, maybe, hid it under floorboards and never came back for it. This is the 1821 British gold sovereign. 200 years old, give or take. Small enough to fit in your palm. Heavy enough to buy a week's groceries in Regency, England. And beautiful enough, honestly, to make you forget you're looking at money at all. But to understand why this coin matters, you have to go back. Back to a Britain that was exhausted from war, flooded with fake money, and desperately in need of something it could trust. The early 1800s were not a comfortable time to be British, unless you happened to be very, very wealthy, in which case things were going quite nicely. For everyone else, it was complicated. Britain had spent the better part of 2 decades fighting Napoleon across half the globe. The wars had drained the treasury, disrupted trade, and created a monetary system that, frankly, nobody trusted anymore. The old gold guinea, the coin that had served as Britain's standard since the 1660s, had grown messy and unreliable over the years. Coins got clipped, shaved, counterfeited. By the time Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo in 1815, British currency was a patchwork mess. Paper, silver, gold, all circulating at different values, trusted to different degrees. The Bank of England had actually suspended gold payments back in 1797. Meaning they stopped exchanging paper money for gold on demand. That suspension lasted over 20 years. 20 years of paper that wasn't backed by anything you could hold in your hand. Something had to change. And the man who pushed hardest for that change was a politician and economist named David Ricardo. Ricardo argued passionately, sometimes controversially, for what he called a return to the gold standard. A system where the value of currency was anchored, literally and physically, to gold. Not to a government's promise. Not to faith. To the metal itself. Parliament listened. And in 1816, they passed the Coinage Act. The Great Recoinage of 1816 was exactly what it sounds like, a complete overhaul of British currency. Out went the guinea. In came a new coin, with a new value, a new design, and a new name. The sovereign. The name wasn't accidental. A sovereign is a ruler, a king, a queen, a supreme authority. Naming the coin after that concept sent a message. This wasn't just money. This was a declaration of order. Of stability. Of British confidence after years of economic uncertainty. The first sovereigns were struck in 1817. But the ones collectors and historians get most excited about are the coins minted just a few years later, particularly those from 1821. And here's why. By 1821, King George III had died and his son, the extravagant, controversial, enormously self-regarding George IV, had taken the throne. A new king meant a new portrait. And for the 1821 sovereign, that portrait was crafted by one of the most celebrated engravers in British royal mint history. His name was Benedetto Pistrucci. And the coin he designed is, by most accounts, one of the most gorgeous pieces of currency ever produced anywhere in the world. Benedetto Pistrucci was Italian. Born in Rome in 1783, trained as a gem engraver, the kind of delicate, precise work you do with a magnifying glass and a very steady hand. He came to London in 1815, more or less by accident, and ended up staying for decades. The Royal Mint took him on, and what he produced there still defines British coinage 2 centuries later. The reverse of the sovereign, the back of the coin, features St. George slaying the dragon. You've probably seen this image before. It's everywhere, on coins, on flags, on pub signs across England. But Pistrucci's version is different. It's alive. St. George is mounted on a powerful horse, rearing up. He's just broken his sword, you can see the broken hilt in his hand, and he's driving a spear through the dragon coiled beneath the horse's hooves. The dragon is writhing. The horse is straining. Every muscle, every feather of the dragon's wings, every fold of the cloak, all of it rendered in a space barely 22 millimeters across. It is, by any measure, a masterpiece of miniature art. Pistrucci modeled his St. George partly on a Roman cameo he had studied in his youth. The classical influence is obvious if you know what to look for, the idealized anatomy, the almost theatrical sense of drama. But the genius of the design is how English it feels, despite being made by an Italian, inspired by Roman art, depicting a Turkish saint. Britain has always been good at absorbing other people's stories and making them its own. So what, exactly, are we looking at when we hold an 1821 sovereign? Physically, the coin is 22.05 millimeters in diameter. It weighs 7.98 grams. It's made of 22-karat gold, that's 91.67% pure, alloyed with copper for hardness. The edge is milled, those little ridged lines around the perimeter, which was actually an anti-counterfeiting measure. If someone tried to shave gold off the edge, the missing ridges would give them away. On the obverse, the front, is the portrait of King George IV. And this is where the 1821 coin gets interesting from a collector's standpoint. The portrait shows the king in a laureate style, wearing a laurel wreath, like a Roman emperor. It's idealized, flattering. In reality, by 1821, George IV was in his late 50s, overweight, and in poor health. The coin, diplomatically, suggests otherwise. Around the portrait runs the Latin inscription, Georgius III de Gratia, George IV, by the grace of God. The date, 1821, appears on the reverse, near the bottom of the St. George design. Small, easy to miss, but significant. Because relatively few sovereigns were struck that year compared to other dates, the 1821 issue is considered genuinely scarce. Not impossibly rare, but not easy to find in good condition either. Numismatists, coin collectors and scholars, grade these pieces on a scale from poor to mint state. An 1821 sovereign in fine condition, showing honest wear from circulation, might sell today for several £1,000s. An example in extremely fine or better, crisp, bright, with full detail, can reach 10, 15, even 20,000 or more at auction, depending on the strike quality and provenance. To spend an 1821 sovereign in the year it was minted was to spend real money. £1 sterling. In 1821, that would buy you roughly 20 loaves of bread. Or a decent pair of boots. Or an evening at the theater with enough left over for a meat pie and a glass of porter. For a working-class family in London, a sovereign represented several days' wages. You didn't spend it lightly. You didn't carry it casually. Gold was heavy, and the weight was the point. 1821 was the year of George IV's coronation, a spectacular, ruinously expensive ceremony that the king personally choreographed. It was also the year Napoleon Bonaparte died on the island of St. Helena, ending an era. And it was the year Britain officially adopted the gold standard, the system David Ricardo had championed, making the sovereign, legally and officially, the backbone of the British monetary system. In the decades that followed, the sovereign didn't just travel through British pockets. It sailed with merchants to India, to Australia, to Canada, to the Caribbean. It crossed deserts in the Middle East. It changed hands in bazaars and trading posts across the British Empire. The sovereign became, for much of the 19th century, the closest thing the world had to a universal currency. You could take a British gold sovereign almost anywhere on Earth and someone would know exactly what it was worth. There's a phrase collectors use, cabinet friction, for the fine hairlines that form on a coin's surface when it rubs against other coins or the lining of a display case. Cabinet friction is considered a flaw. It lowers the grade, reduces the value. But I've always found something quietly moving about it. Because it means people looked at this. Picked it up. Passed it around. Thought it was worth keeping. The 1821 British gold sovereign is a small thing. You could lose it in a coat pocket. You could mistake it, at a glance, for a foreign coin or a token. But hold it up to the light, and Pistrucci's St. George comes alive, the dragon twisting, the horse rearing, that broken sword catching the gold. It was minted in a year when Britain was reinventing itself. When a new king sat on the throne and a new monetary order was being built from the ground up. When people wanted something solid they could trust, not a promise on paper, but metal they could weigh and test and hold. In a way, every sovereign ever struck is a kind of argument. An argument that some things have enduring value. That craftsmanship matters. That beauty and utility aren't opposites. The 1821 sovereign makes that argument better than almost any coin ever minted. 200 years old. 22 millimeters across. 7.98 grams of gold. And still, somehow, worth more than the sum of its parts.